10 years ago, you could sit through an entire movie without reaching for your phone, without needing something else to happen, just watching, thinking, paying attention. You could read for hours, lose yourself in a book, follow a single thought all the way to the end. Now, many people struggle to finish a 5-minute video, a single page, a simple task. Why? Did we suddenly become weaker, less disciplined, less intelligent? No, something changed, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly, and most people never noticed it happening. Something has been reshaping the way we think, the way we focus, the way we experience the world, day after day, year after year. It's affecting your attention, your memory, your decisions, your ambitions, even your personality. Because attention is not just what you focus on. Attention is what shapes your reality. What you pay attention to becomes your thoughts, your habits, your future, and eventually, it becomes you. Which means losing your attention is never just about distraction. It's about identity. And by the end of this video, you may discover something unsettling. Your attention isn't disappearing by accident. It's being taken, one moment at a time. Most losses are obvious. You notice when you lose money. You notice when you lose a relationship. You notice when an opportunity slips away. The evidence is right in front of you. The damage is visible. The cost is immediate. But attention is different. Attention doesn't disappear all at once. It leaves quietly. So quietly. Most people never hear it go. One day, you can sit with a book for hours, focused, present, absorbed. Then, little by little, something changes. A page becomes difficult. A chapter feels long. A moment of silence feels uncomfortable. And before you realize it, even a 5-minute video can feel like a commitment. The same thing happens inside your mind. You once had the ability to follow a thought, to stay with it, to explore it. Now, the mind keeps looking for an exit, a distraction, a notification, a message, a new tab, something different, something faster, something easier, anything but this moment. The strange part is that most people never notice the shift while it's happening, because the change is gradual, almost invisible. Day after day, choice after choice, scroll after scroll, until the consequences begin to appear. Projects left unfinished, books left unopened, ideas abandoned halfway through, goals pushed further into the future, dreams placed on hold. Not because they weren't capable, because they could no longer stay focused long enough to become capable. And eventually, they look at the outcome and blame themselves. They call themselves lazy, undisciplined, unmotivated. They assume the problem is their character, when in reality, something much deeper has been happening. Because the frightening part is not that attention disappears. The frightening part is how long it can disappear before anyone notices. Months, sometimes years. And by the time most people see the consequences, the habit has already become a way of life. Most people think the greatest theft of the modern world is money. Money can be counted, measured, recovered. You know when it's gone. But there is something far more valuable, something far more difficult to replace. And every day, it is taken from millions of people, quietly, relentlessly, one moment at a time. Not their savings, not their possessions, not their status, their attention, because attention is the resource that determines everything else. What you notice, what you learn, what you remember, what you become. And while most people are busy protecting their money, they rarely notice what is truly disappearing: their attention. Every generation has competed for resources: food, land, energy, time. the things people needed to survive, the things nations fought to control. But today, the most valuable resource is something far less visible. It's attention, because attention shapes everything. What you notice, what you ignore, what you think about, what you believe, what stays in your memory, what you begin to desire, and ultimately, who you become. For most of human history, attention belonged to the individual. Now, it has become one of the most competitive markets on Earth, because for the first time in history, billions of dollars are being spent to capture it. Every platform, every app, every notification, every recommendation, every endless scroll, competing for the same thing: a few seconds of your focus, a moment of your awareness, a fraction of your life. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You are not the product being sold. You are not even the customer. Your attention is, because attention can be measured, tracked, predicted, bought, and sold. The most powerful companies in the world understand something most people don't. Whoever controls attention influences behavior, and whoever influences behavior shapes the future. That's why they are no longer just competing to sell products. They are competing for your awareness, for your thoughts, for your habits, for the limited space inside your mind. And by the end of this video, you may begin to see attention differently, not as a simple mental skill, but as the most valuable asset you possess. Because in the years ahead, attention may become more valuable than intelligence itself. And those who learn to protect it may have an advantage that few people truly understand. But the real problem isn't that companies want your attention. The real problem is what happens after they get it. Because attention doesn't simply disappear, it changes something, slowly, quietly, often without you noticing. And over time, those small changes begin to reshape the way you think, the way you feel, the way you experience the world. We'll come back to that in a moment. Because before you can understand what's happening to your brain, you first need to understand the battle being fought for it. Quick question. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No music, no scrolling, no videos, no notifications, no stimulation at all. Just you. And your thoughts. Can you remember? Take a moment. Most people can't. Not because they're forgetful, but because those moments have become surprisingly rare. We've filled nearly every empty space, every pause, every quiet moment with something: a screen, a sound, a distraction. And that may seem harmless until you realize what constant stimulation is replacing. Because the absence of silence changes more than your environment. It changes your mind. And that's far more important than it seems. The brain is always learning, always adapting. Whether you notice it or not, every repeated behavior leaves a mark. Every habit teaches a lesson. And over time, the brain becomes better at whatever it practices most. What you repeat grows stronger. What you neglect slowly fades. That's true for almost everything: memory, physical strength, communication, and attention, especially attention. And that's where the problem begins. Because modern life rarely trains attention to stay. It trains attention to move, swipe, refresh, scroll, click, switch, repeat, again, and again, and again, thousands of times, every day. Without realizing it, your brain starts adapting to the pattern. It learns interruption. It learns novelty. It learns speed. It learns that something new is always waiting just around the corner. Something brighter, faster, more stimulating. And eventually, stillness begins to feel strange. Silence feels uncomfortable. Focus feels harder than it used to. Not because your brain is broken, not because you're incapable of concentrating, but because your brain has become incredibly efficient at something else. It has learned to expect constant change, and when change becomes the norm, deep focus begins to feel like deprivation. Not because focus is unnatural, but because distraction has become familiar. Imagine a university student. He sits down at his desk. Books open, laptop ready, a clear intention. He's going to study. For a moment, everything feels under control. 5 minutes pass. A notification appears. Just a quick look. Nothing serious. 10 minutes later, he's watching videos. One leads to another, then another. The original task fades into the background. 20 minutes later, a quiet feeling begins to appear. Guilt. The sense that he should be doing something else. An hour later, he reaches a conclusion millions of people reach every day. Maybe I'm just not disciplined enough. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe something is wrong with me. But what if that's not the real problem? What if the failure happened much earlier? Before the guilt, before the distraction, before the self-criticism? Because discipline was never the first thing he lost. Attention was. And once attention begins to slip away, discipline is often forced to fight a battle that's already been lost. Every distraction teaches a lesson. Not the lesson you intended to learn, but a lesson nonetheless. Because the brain is always paying attention, always adapting, always taking notes. And with every interruption, it learns something. It learns what deserves your focus, what deserves your curiosity, what deserves your time. The more often attention is pulled away, the more valuable distraction begins to seem. Until eventually, the brain stops asking what matters most and starts responding to whatever appears next. Because your brain is always learning, always listening, always deciding what deserves attention. Remember the question from earlier. What happens when attention is captured again and again and again? Here's the answer. The brain starts to change, slowly, quietly, without warning. It begins to lose its tolerance for boredom, and boredom is not what most people think it is. Boredom is not emptiness. It's a doorway, a starting point, because boredom is where focus begins, where creativity begins, where reflection begins, where original thought finally has space to appear. But modern life treats boredom like something to escape, something to fix immediately, something to erase. The moment it shows up, we reach for something else. A screen, a sound, a distraction. And every time we do, something quiet disappears. The ability to stay still long enough for deeper thoughts to form. The ability to remain present without escaping the moment. And over time, that silence becomes harder to find, not because it is gone, but because it is no longer comfortable. The goal of modern technology isn't always addiction. It doesn't need to be. It only needs one thing: to make stillness feel slightly less appealing. Again, and again, and again, until distraction feels normal and focus feels like effort. The internet didn't destroy your attention overnight. It didn't happen all at once. It was slower than that, almost invisible. At first, it felt harmless. Just quick checks, just short breaks, just a few seconds at a time. But something deeper was happening. Your brain was learning that stillness is temporary, that silence is not necessary, that every quiet moment can be filled, replaced, interrupted, over and over again. And slowly, the mind adapts. It begins to expect interruption, to anticipate it, to almost look for it. Because stillness starts to feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things feel uncomfortable. That is how change happens here, not through destruction, but through repetition, until one day you notice it. Even a single moment of quiet feels like something needs to break it, and that changes everything. But attention loss creates something deeper, something more serious, and far less obvious. It doesn't just affect focus, it affects how you think, how you feel, how you respond to life, because attention is not just a tool, it is a filter. It decides what becomes real in your mind, what gets processed, what gets remembered, what gets ignored. And over time, that filter begins to shift, quietly, without permission, without awareness. And when attention weakens, something else starts to happen. The self begins to fragment, not all at once, but piece by piece, because who you are is built from what you consistently notice, what you repeatedly engage with, what you return to. And most people never see the connection. They notice the distraction. They feel the loss of focus, but they miss the deeper change underneath it all. That attention loss is never just about productivity. It is about identity. And that is the part most people never realize. Most people think attention is a tool, something you use, something you control, something you switch on and off. But it isn't. Attention is deeper than that. Much deeper. It is the foundation of identity, because what you repeatedly pay attention to slowly shapes everything about you. Your interests, your priorities, your habits, your direction in life, your future. Think about it. Nothing changes instantly. It changes through repetition, through focus, through what you return to, again and again. Attention shapes experience. Experience shapes memory. Memory shapes identity. And identity shapes the life you live. So attention is not just observation, it is transformation. It is not just what you are looking at, it is what you are becoming. And once you see that clearly, it changes everything. If someone controls your attention long enough, something begins to shift, quietly, without resistance. At first, it feels harmless, just content, just information, just something to look at. But attention is never neutral. It always moves something inside you. A thought, a feeling, a direction. And over time, what you repeatedly focus on starts to shape you. Your thoughts begin to follow it. Your emotions begin to respond to it. Your decisions begin to align with it. And slowly, almost invisibly, you change. Not through force, but through exposure. Because whoever holds your attention, even briefly, has access to your inner world. And if that access continues long enough, it doesn't just influence what you see, it influences who you become. Look back at the last 7 days. Not quickly, slowly, carefully. What captured most of your attention? Was it something meaningful? Something you chose with intention? Or was it something else? Something simply available? Something easy? Something automatic? Something you didn't even question? Because attention doesn't always go where we want it to go. It goes where it is pulled, repeatedly, quietly, and over time, those small moments begin to add up, not into memories, but into direction. Because what you consistently attend to starts to shape where your life moves next. More than your goals, more than your plans, more than your intentions. Your attention reveals your trajectory. And that realization can be uncomfortable, but it is also honest. Because your future is not only built by what you want, it is built by what you repeatedly look at, again and again and again. Now we arrive at the real danger. It is not distraction, not in the way people usually think. The real problem is something deeper. Fragmentation. Your attention is no longer whole. It breaks apart, piece by piece, smaller and smaller. 10 seconds here, 30 seconds there, a quick glance, a quick scroll, a quick switch. None of it feels important on its own. That is what makes it dangerous, because nothing feels like a loss. But together, they change everything. Slowly, quietly, deep work begins to feel difficult. Reading loses its depth. Learning takes more effort. Patience feels thinner. Presence becomes unstable. And even simple enjoyment starts to fade. Because attention is not separate from experience. It is what makes experience possible. Without it, nothing fully lands. Nothing fully stays. And nothing is fully felt. Most people believe they are consuming information, but over time, the truth reverses. Information begins to consume their attention, and the cost is not felt immediately. It appears later, when concentration no longer feels natural, only difficult. The quality of your life is not random. It is shaped quietly, moment by moment, and at the center of it all is something most people overlook: your attention. Because whatever you consistently notice becomes the structure of your experience. What you focus on expands. What you ignore fades. And over time, this simple pattern begins to define everything: your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, your direction in life, even your sense of meaning. So life does not rise above attention. It follows it, like a shadow follows light. And this is the parts most people miss. They try to change outcomes without changing focus. But attention comes first, always. And in the end, the quality of your life quietly reflects the quality of your attention. The quality of your life is never accidental. It is directed, quietly, from the inside. And it begins with something most people never question: attention. Because whatever you consistently notice starts to define your reality. What you look at grows louder in your mind. What you ignore slowly disappears from your world. And over time, this simple pattern becomes everything: your thoughts, your emotions, your habits, your decisions, even the path you take without realizing it. So life doesn't move first. Attention does. It leads, and everything else follows behind it. Most people try to change their lives outwardly, without ever changing what they focus on inwardly. But attention always comes first. Always. And in the end, the life you experience is only as strong as the attention that shapes it. Most people think attention is drained by effort, by concentration, by pushing the mind too hard. But the real drain is often something else, something quieter, something constant, switching from one thing to another, and then another. Every switch has a cost. Even when it feels insignificant, every interruption leaves a trace, a residue, a fragment of attention left behind. And slowly, those fragments begin to accumulate. You feel busy, occupied, in motion all day long. Yet when the day ends, it's difficult to say what truly moved forward. You consume more information, yet remember less of it. You spend more time connected, yet feel less engaged with what is right in front of you. And little by little, attention weakens, not through a single dramatic loss, but through division, again, and again, and again, one interruption at a time, until fragmentation starts to feel normal, until constant switching feels natural, until stillness feels unfamiliar. But there is a deeper consequence. Most people believe they are making hundreds of decisions every day, choosing what to think, choosing what to do, choosing where to go next. But many of those choices begin much earlier, the moment something captures attention. Because attention often decides first, and the mind follows after. That is the paradox. The more your attention is directed by external forces, the less direction remains in your own hands, and the shift is almost invisible. It happens gradually, quietly, until one day, it feels as though life is moving on its own, and you are no longer holding the wheel. Maybe the problem isn't that you can't focus anymore. Maybe the problem is deeper than that. Your attention hasn't disappeared. It has been trained, conditioned to expect movement constantly, to expect novelty constantly, to expect something new every few seconds. Maybe attention isn't something you lost. Maybe it's something you stopped training, stopped protecting, stopped directing, because attention behaves like a muscle. What grows depends entirely on how it is used. And in the world we live in now, it is rarely held in one place for long. So the skill is not just focus, it is choice. The ability to place your attention and keep it there, even when everything around you is designed to move it. Because in a world competing for every second of your awareness, attention becomes something more than a skill. It becomes clarity. It becomes control. It becomes freedom. And slowly, freedom becomes power. Not loud power, not visible power, but the quiet kind. The kind that shapes direction. The kind that shapes identity. So maybe the real question isn't whether you can focus, but whether you can still choose where your mind lives. If this video changed the way you see attention, subscribe, because next, we go deeper into something even more uncomfortable. You don't lack discipline. You have a broken reward system. And once you see how it works, you'll understand why your brain keeps pulling you away from the very life you want to build.